Okay, thank you. So it seems like we have everybody in the room now. Thank you for the music. That was great. um, yeah, so we're just about to kick off this event, and to do that, would like to say thank you for joining us. And if you have any technical difficulties during the conversation today, please let us know. Put a note in the chat. I see that folks are already introducing themselves. Thank you so much for that. We have a very diverse group today, so that's awesome. Yeah, just a bit of housekeeping. This event is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, no problem at all. Just turn off your camera, and we'll respect your wishes. And we'd just like to start with a land acknowledgement before we go into our dialogue. And I'd like to say that, we acknowledge that this event is taking place from Ottawa, which is the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Each and every day, we are grateful to live, work, and play on this land. So I just like to, allow that moment of just gratefulness and acknowledgement of this space that we get to live, work, and play in. So another housekeeping note, I see the chat function is really being used. So the other thing I'd like to encourage is if there are thoughts and comments that come up as you hear from the speakers, please use the chat function for that as well. And if you have any questions that do come up right away for you before we get to the audience Q&A, feel free to send it in the chat. We will definitely take notes of them. And I just want to say thank you for being here. I suppose this is the first GenNext Ottawa event of 2022. So thank you for being at this event. It's exciting to be hosting and to be a part of this dialogue with the incredible Faiza and Harar, and obviously the wonderful GenNext team. So thanks everybody for being here and spending your lunch hour with us. Okay. So I'll do a brief intro about myself, and then we'll get to hear from the speakers. Honestly, I won't spend too much talking about myself because it's not really about me, but I will just to create a level of trust with everybody today. My name is Zainab Muse, and I am both a design strategist and a filmmaker. I operate in Ottawa, but right now I'm in BC. It has been quite nice and sunny, but last night it snowed, so it's a little bit sad. But outside of my work, I deeply enjoy participating in dialogue around how we are building a future that is fair and equitable for everyone. And that includes spotlighting unheard voices and marginalized artists. So I personally believe art is functional in our lives, and that sometimes we don't even notice its impact around us. So from the shows we watched on Netflix to get us through the pandemic, the books we read, the songs we wrote, and the poems we recited, to the mural art we created to express social injustices, art always moves us forward. And so, really talking about the power of making us a community and how we can recognize our commonalities through art is one that's quite important to me. And I do like to give this quote by Miss Maya Angelou, and it's, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." And art really does help us accomplish that. It helps us see that. And this is why an event like this is very important, where we get to talk about how we can build communities using art. So before we go into the conversation, I do want to start with a disclaimer, because I see that it's a very active group. So one thing I would like to say is, let's continue that support for one another. Let's share about the work that we do and recognize that we're trying to build a safe space today for dialogue that is about community building. And so that means that, even if I'm hosting or you hear from the speakers, we're not perfect. We're because we're human. So there are some mistakes or stumbles we make along the way when it comes to language. But we are trying to build that space for learning and co-creation. And it's important that we, as a group today, recognize that. So let's all extend a level of kindness and compassion during this conversation, and let's be open-minded to learning and to hearing about the experiences that you're going to hear about today from Faiza Omer and Harar Hall. So thank you for being a part of today's session and today's events. And before I sort of pass it over to Faiza and Harar, I will pass it on to Tristan. Tristan is a GenNext advocate, and Tristan has some important info about the program and how you can continue to show your support.
Perfect. Thanks, Zainab. Hi, everyone. I'm Tristan. Yeah, like it was mentioned, I'm a volunteer for the GenNext Advocate Program. Some of you may be joining us for the first time. So GenNext is a social impact movement for people who want to learn more about the unique challenges facing our region and create meaningful local change. We're powered by the United Way East Ontario, and GenNext is on a mission to inspire and enable the next generation of change makers to fuel 100% local impact. You can check out our website at gennexteo.ca, and you can also sign up for the newsletter, which I think is really informative and really important to stay up to date on all sorts of things happening in our community. So we'll put that link in the chat as well. I'm also proud to let you know that the proceeds from tickets are going directly towards communities in support of initiatives that strengthen and advocate for diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. GenNext also supports mental health, youth homelessness, and equitable employment. So you can learn more about these main 4 causes and what we do on our website, like I mentioned, and we'll drop a link to that as well in the chat. Ongoing donations, even in small amounts, provide GenNext with reliable funds that are needed to fuel lasting change in our region. And that's actually why we've created GenNext Plus. So from early access to discounts on events, being a GenNext Plus donor comes with great perks. And best of all, each month you can feel good knowing you've done maybe a small thing, but a great thing for your community. Speaking of showing up for your community, we also really want to thank our supporting sponsors, Top Shelf Distillers and Dominion City Brewing Company, for their ongoing support of all things GenNext. Before I pass it back to Zainab, I wanted to add that if anyone's interested in volunteering for just 2 to 4 hours a month to support GenNext, whether that means participating in events like I am today, writing content, or helping spread the word, then you should definitely check out the Advocate Program. You can send me a message directly in the chat if you'd like to know more, and we'll also drop the link with more information on how to volunteer with the Advocate Program if you're interested. I'll pass it back to Zainab now. Thanks.
Thanks, Tristan. So it's time to kick things off and start today's conversation about creating community through arts. And we'll talk about how art can drive social change and hear from Faiza and Harar. And I'd like to begin with Faiza. So when I chatted with Faiza shared a little bit about the background that Faiza had in sort of in the art space as a photographer, and the work that Faiza is deeply interested in. And I thought it was pretty impressive how ensuring that voices are heard, and voices are typically unheard, and images that we typically don't see in gallery spaces are being spotlighted. So Faiza, thank you for being here. Faiza is a studio photographer and mental health professional born and raised here in Ottawa. Her parents immigrated to Canada to escape the Somali Civil War. Her recent projects have challenged perceptions about Black youth and shown how certain communities have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Faiza, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me today. I'm very honored. Hopefully, I can effectively put across everything that's in my mind, because there's always a lot going on. Might have AEC, not sure yet, but anyway. So my name is Faiza Omar, and I always loved photography. I ended up doing 7 years of neuroscience at Carleton University. So I did a bachelor's and a master's in Carleton University. And when I was almost done my master's degree in neuroscience, I was very burnt out, and I decided to pursue my passion. And this is 7 years of science. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna enroll to photography at Algonquin. And that's kind of where I got that training as a studio photographer. So from then on, I used those skills that I've learned at the Algonquin photography program to kind of what Zainab said before, to amplify voices and put together projects which tackle some tough issues.
And I do want to highlight one thing you mentioned about how you have an academic background in the sciences, but then you express through art. Like I thought that was interesting. I don't know if I obviously we'll talk more about that in the question section. But I thought it was very interesting how you're navigating those two worlds. Thanks, Faiza. So I'd like to introduce Harar. Harar is a multidisciplinary artist, poet, facilitator, event programmer, and curator who has focused on carving out space for artistic expression within marginalized communities that they are a part of. Their work draws on their own experiences with identity, love, lust, belonging, happiness, community, and personal storytelling. Those are really wonderful statements, Harar. Thanks for joining us here. Can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I think it's so interesting because I've been like thinking a lot about, labeling myself as an artist, or like all of the sort of labels we use to describe and present ourselves to the world. And I grew up in a family that was like art was just like what we did. Like my mom is an artist. My dad was a teacher, but he also drew. Like my little brothers and my sister, like everyone draws and creates in my family, and it's very natural. But it was also never a thing that was really like pushed as like a professional destination. It was like, yes, of course you do art. Like we're like, yeah, we draw all the time. We, make comic books together. My mom makes jewelry, but like, that's not what you do as your job. And so I'm also like, I think I am very academically inclined in that I love reading. I love learning. Like, I think I get really excited about the idea of learning, not necessarily the idea of school and testing, even though I've somehow managed to stay in school for so long. This is the first year in my whole life that I haven't been in school, and I just finished my master's back in June of last year. So it's been really interesting being outside of the confines of an academic environment. But I think what has been really important to me in terms of developing my academic practice, as well as like my political practice, as well as my artistic practice, I guess, is trying to find spaces that they overlap in. And I studied global politics, and then I did my MA in International Affairs and Conflict Management. But a lot of the research I did also focused on the role of art and artistic movements overlapping with revolutionary movements and like change and social movements, because I think that like art is such a beautiful unifying language that I think oftentimes doesn't have the, I want to say, inaccessibility that academic language does. Like not everyone has access to, because a lot of times things are behind paywalls, or even wants to read like a 30-page paper with a bunch of language that only makes sense to like 10 people in the like academic community. But I think everyone can like feel something when they see like beautiful art, when they see a mural, when they see like posters, when they see a movie or like a film. There's like, I think art is such a beautiful expression of the feelings that we're like navigating as we move through this world, and also like such a beautiful form of communicating those feelings to the people outside of us. And so I think of art and like, I guess like my hope for like political change and like the work I do in community as like integral to each other, which is, I guess, like when I try to explain all of the different things I do, and people often like come to me and they're like, that seems like a lot. And I'm like, yes, it's a lot to like write down and describe, but they all support each other in like, I think moving towards a future that I want to see for myself and for my community and the communities that I'm a part of. So yeah, I'm sure I'll talk more about like all of the different types of art. I do like acrylic, I do mixed media art, I am a spoken word poet. I'm a baker. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I also do a lot of like programming and curating of spaces and events, because I think that like creating space is so important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Harar. Yeah, I think that's one thing when we connected was around how multidisciplinary you are in terms of just ensuring that fluidity with your practices. So it's not just one thing or have that label necessarily. It's being able to participate in certain spaces and learn and be curious. So that's awesome. And to everyone in the room, please share your thoughts around what you've heard so far about Harar and Faiza's background. And if there's any similarities that you find with your own experiences, please share. We want to hear. So we can move into some questions now, since we've sort of gotten to hear a little bit about what you do, what you both do actually. So my first question is for both of you, Faiza and Harar. How do you use art as a tool for expression, and what motivates you to keep going, right? So as artists, because you sort of express with other forms. So, Faiza mentioned definitely having an academic background and a practice in science, but still being a photographer, and Harar as well, just sort of having other things that you do beyond art and not wanting to label yourself. So how do you then make that choice to use art when you want to and when you can for expression, and then what motivates you to keep using art as a tool for expression?
Should I go first?
Oh.
Okay. Popular question.
You can go first.
Okay. I was gonna say I don't think of it as like a choice. At least for me, I think of it as like necessary. Like expressing myself artistically. Like I whether I share it, whether I broadcast it to the world, that's definitely a choice. But like writing, like poetry, especially for me, I think of that as like so deeply tied to my survival. Like I discovered poetry not through like, I don't know, like performing it for other people. It was just like a means of expressing myself and working through emotions and feelings and like really difficult experiences when I didn't have access to therapy. And so in my mind, like art is like healing and survival. And so I almost, the idea of like whether or not I choose to express myself through art is like, what else would I do? Well, I can't even imagine a world in which I didn't do this. The sharing bit is definitely obviously a whole other side of it. But yeah, the expression itself feels necessary.
Wow. Yeah. No. Thank you for that. I feel like that's such a poignant line. Art is, it's necessary. It's not like it's a choice in any way. It's just you just have to. That's what you have. Thank you for sharing that. Faiza, how about you?
I agree with everything Harar just said. I think it's necessary as well. For my background, I kind of briefly mentioned it. I needed art to survive. Like I just did this, long stint at Carleton University, and I needed something to keep me going because I was so burnt out. And for me, that was my art, my photography, right? Even to today, working as a mental health clinician, I use photography as self-care, and that's kind of how I got back into it after getting this job and whatnot. It brings me back to my baseline. I have that passion for it. It brings me joy. Honestly, sometimes like it feels like it's not even a choice. Like I'd be walking and then I get an idea, like an epiphany, like, oh, this would be a great photo shoot. And I have to honor that idea. Even if it's 2 years down the line, I'm gonna do this photo shoot. It's gonna have to happen. I have to honor these epiphanies and the ideas that I have. So that's something that kind of keeps me going. But definitely, it's self-care and it keeps me safe.
Also, can I just say, Faiza,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you on that like thing where like you just get an idea and it hits you and you're like, well, now I have to. Like there's no other option. You're just like walking. I got like a lot of ideas in the shower. And then I'm like, like up at the middle of the night, and I'm like sketching, I'm showing my partner and my friends, and I'm like, I just got this idea, and I'm trying to like explain like all the textures and like materials I want to use, and they're like, we're so excited for you, can't wait to see the final product.
That's awesome. No, I was gonna say that I really like that the both of you used arts. You said arts as self-care. Like it almost feels like you have to. It's almost like a call-in a way, right? You accept this call, and then it sort of helps you express yourself and express the version you want to put out there. So I think yeah, that's a very important sentiment, and it's something that we should sort of begin to understand that art is so intrinsic within all of us, and it's so intertwined with our environment, our nature, ourselves. And so when we separate it and commoditize it, that's a whole bucket of worms that I'm not going to start, but there's a whole thing about what happens when you start to take this really pure intrinsic thing and start to make it so overtly commoditized, overtly capitalized, and then exclusive, and then we go into the spaces of inequities. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you both for sharing that. Yeah, that's very important, and it's a good reminder for all of us today. My next question is: so if art is that intrinsic part of yourselves, then do you have a formal artistic process that you like to use? So with Harar, maybe if you're writing, is there a process you've now set up for yourself, or when you're doing some visual arts, or with Faiza as well, is there like a formal process you've now developed for yourself to make this make sense to you as artists?
I'll go first. So when it comes to photography, for me, I don't really, I have a very loose process. I do most of my shoots at my home, and I usually shoot friends and family unless I'm doing a project or whatnot. So it could be very impulsive sometimes. Like, you know what, I want to do a photo shoot today. I'm gonna call my friend who's down the street. I just thought of this idea. I have some time. I feel good about it. So I created my own space within my home. When I'm in Ottawa, we do it in the basement. When I'm in Edmonton, I do it in the dining room to shoot and whatnot. But definitely, it's a learning process. I didn't get to finish that program at Algonquin, so I'm always learning more techniques from YouTube. I go to the camera store. They don't have to do too much to get me to buy a bunch of things, so definitely I'm furthering my craft, and the process is very loose because and then it doesn't really become self-care, right? If it's too rigid. So I try not to take myself too seriously, honestly.
Thank you, Faiza. How about you, Harar?
Yeah, I think it's so, I think that the idea, like there's a huge backlog of ideas, I think, in my mind at all times, because there's like obviously so many things that I want to do that I either don't have the time for, or sometimes don't have the resources, like especially if I'm thinking of like a project or an installation that's like big and requires a bit more funding. But I think for me, very similar to what Faiza said, I don't want to create too much of a structure because I don't want to take the joy out of this thing that is so important for me. And that was even a really, really big, I think, barrier for me even sharing or like selling my art for a really long time, because I was really scared about the idea of like either trying to make this my livelihood, because I don't want to ever like tie, like needing to pay rent to like creating, because I think that can like create a lot of stresses and pressures and take my love away from that. And I'm in this weird space now where I'm doing a lot more freelance work. And so I am getting more money for it. And I'm still trying to like make sure that I never need to depend on art to be like my main source of income. And that's just like a personal choice for me, because I want it to always exist as an avenue of like joy and like not a thing that's rooted in capitalism for me. And that's really important. And so I feel like because of that, I always have ideas. And I really think that that is so exciting, but my ideas come from everywhere. Like there is no one singular source of inspiration. I get ideas sometimes like by walking down the street. I get a lot of ideas speaking to like I'm the oldest of 5 siblings. So I'm 24 and like all of my siblings are a lot younger than me. I get ideas like talking to them because I think like I honestly think my like little sister and brother are like some of the most talented digital artists I know. And I'm like, always like, share your work. It's so amazing. And yeah, and so but I also get ideas from like friends, like the people that I'm in community with, like fellow poets, fellow artists, fellow creatives. They inspire me like just indefinitely, like into the future. Like every time I speak to my friends, speak to the people I'm in community with, I get like 10 million more ideas, which is why I always say, I'm like, I don't think I have an original thought ever. Not that I don't think I have an original thought, but just that like everything that I create is so tied to my environment, so tied to my community, so tied to the brilliant people around me. And then I think I also now get a lot of inspiration from dreaming, and like not like dreaming while I'm sleeping, but like dreaming in terms of like really exercising my imagination, like really pushing the limits of what I believe is like possible within the realms of creativity, what is possible within the realms of like our society, what is possible within the realms of like our political imaginations. And I think that has really been pushing like my poetry and my art and like the mixed media essence of my work recently. It's like this like constant exercise in dreaming. And so I'm really excited about like what that is doing for my work right now. But yeah, everywhere, I guess. Inspiration comes everywhere. Sometimes it comes from being sad and that's sucky, but then it's always nice when you're like a little sad, but you're like, damn, this is gonna be a fire poem, because, you know, it helps you get through it.
Thank you so much, Harar. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like the good and the bad are also sources of inspiration. But I like what you were saying about how sometimes these ideas hit in random places. And there's a conversation that's happening around how, you know, how when you have an idea and then maybe you don't, you know, express that idea, and then a year or two you see someone else sort of, oh, I had that idea, you know, someone that actually moved forward with it. And there's a theory that ideas just sort of bounce from people to people, so there aren't actually ever any original ideas. It's just whoever wants to express them. And I thought that was interesting because that's a whole science fiction piece right there. But I thought it was interesting what you were saying. It reminded me of that. Yeah, so I guess I love hearing your your thoughts around your sources of inspiration. Faiza, I'm just curious if you can share your sources of inspiration, and I know you have some images you'd like to share. I'd like to know you know, who your subjects are when you do your photography work, and yeah, how you get inspired to create photography art.
So I have like a short PowerPoint. So I'm gonna try and share that. Just some of my images. So share screen. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, I needed it. I can see you guys, so that's good. So this is just a really quick kind of overview of what I do. I'm gonna time myself to 3 minutes if that's okay. But I primarily try to use photography as a social tool. So this is my previous work where I'm not using photography as a social tool. So these are just photos of friends and family in my dining room. or in my basement. So I enjoy taking a lot of fashion type photos as well of Black people. So this is just the other stuff that I do. But the first project I did was in response to the murder of George Floyd. So this project was done in the summer of 2020. My family is from Ritchie, that's in the west end of Ottawa. We were living there for like 20 years. I'm an adult. I got to get my degrees and move out, but my family, like the younger ones and my mom and dad still live there. So the idea that I had was with my brother, and he told me that he told me some of his experiences with racism in the school that he went to. So I thought, hey, maybe we can share some of these stories and bring in your friends from the neighborhood as well. So we did portraits and collected stories. This was just for Instagram. It wasn't meant to go anywhere because it's a self-care for me. Take my pictures, put it on Instagram, move on. Got picked up by the CBC. Eventually made it to the Ottawa Art Gallery. So these are some of the images from that project. And the good thing about my academic background, I also have a master's in counseling psychology. So as a therapist, if someone gets triggered because these are tough questions during the photo shoot, I can kind of bring them back down to their to baseline. So this is a quote from this project. The pizza place near the neighborhood had a 2-slice, get a free drink deal. I went to order my pizza, first grabbing my drink on the way, when one of the customers in the store started screaming that I was stealing. The owner came from the back and kicked me out of the store. I didn't get pizza that day. So this is one of the stories that one of the youth from those images shared. What made this project very interesting is that Ritchie actually doesn't have the best reputation in Ottawa. So this was just like the other side of what's happening to the youth that grow up in this area, right? So it kind of showcases the barriers that they face. So I also did a second project called It's Different for Us with the Southeast Ottawa Community Health Center. So this was in response to the very, very high rates of COVID-19 in South End Ottawa. So that's Harrington, Heron, that area, those neighborhoods. They had their own testing sites, like a bus basically in front of their neighborhoods because of the sheer number of cases. And it kind of, the portraits as well as the quotes kind of showcase how the population that lives in these neighborhoods are essential workers, right? They are the front line when it comes to society during the pandemic. So this is kind of shedding light into that issue. These are some of the images. We had 6 youth from the Southeast Ottawa Community Health Center. And here are some of their quotes. I'm not going to read everything. I'll just read like 2. I live in a household with a lot of people, and when everyone is using the Wi-Fi at once, learning online is that much harder. I used to have a job at the university. It got cut because of COVID. I went through hundreds of job applications before at least one called me back. So it kind of shows the barriers that this community was facing. So that was my second project. Thankfully, both of them were picked up by the media. So yeah, so that was great. And like I said before, the Reclaiming Ritchie project was part of a group exhibition called Sheltered in Place at the Ottawa Art Gallery last year. And this is just a mock-up of how it was a huge wall. So we had the quotes up there. We had the images were printed really big. We had images from Ritchie as well. We have some landscape images. Yeah, so that's that. My most recent project was actually done in Edmonton. So CBC Black in the Prairies reached out to me, and they commissioned me to take photos of Black Muslim women in the city of Edmonton. So we chose 6 people of different ages, and we did an interview with them, collected quotes. They did a short video. I took portraits of their experiences, and how they think about how they feel about what's happening right now. If you're not really sure what's going on here in the West of Canada, there's a heightened amount of attacks against Muslim women, in particular Black Muslim women. So these are some of the portraits. We also did projections of the sites where Black Muslim women were attacked, and we kind of put that onto them. So these are some of those images. So you can kind of see it's public places like train stations, you know, the middle of the street. So that was my most recent project. I think it was like a month ago that came out. And my future project, it's a lot of photography, guys. Oh, it didn't do, oh, here it is. I don't know why that stopped. Oh, yeah. So can you all still see that? Yeah, okay, great. So this is my future project that we're just kind of still editing these images. But thankfully I got a nice grant last year to kind of continue the Reclaiming Ritchie project. But this time we went to 3 other neighborhoods. This is not out yet. These images are not even edited yet. So we did Lower Town in the beige here. We did Michelle Heights in the red, and then we did Overbrook with the teal color. All my backdrops were hand painted. So this was like a really great project. And we also asked them similar questions, like, have you ever gone through a racist experience in Ottawa? If so, can you share? What does it mean to be Black? So that's just a lot of feedback from the Black community in these 3 neighborhoods. So that's something to kind of look forward to. And that's all for me.
Thank you so much, Faiza. I just had a question for you. So it's definitely very inspiring and quite impressive, honestly, the level of trust that you have with a lot of your subjects in revealing some of these quite personal and quite impactful moments in their lives. So I'm just curious, how do you ensure that there's a safe space, right, when you invite them, and also how do you, like, that safe space doesn't lead to trauma mining, right? Because you do also want to tell their story, but also not sort of re-trigger them in that sense of going back to when they felt most vulnerable. So I'm just curious how you create that, and maybe in your question, if you can also add how the audience, everyone listening, can also create safe spaces for people who may be going through a lot of these very negative experiences in the community.
So while you were talking, I was kind of putting my answer together, and as someone of color, I think the number one thing is just to listen. I don't need a solution. I don't, if I'm expressing myself, I just want that safe space where I know the other person is listening to me. And, there's a lot of techniques to show that you're listening. For example, as therapists, we're taught to make eye contact. We're taught to, to signal that we are listening by saying things like, okay. And that really builds that sense of trust, right? It's a bit easier for me because I have that master's in counseling psychology. This is my job, and that's why I think I've been successful in having my subjects trust me. Sometimes I ask a question and I can see that my subject doesn't want to answer. So, I have that emotional intelligence to kind of be like, oh, well, actually, why don't I ask you this lighter, more joyful question instead, right? So you're constantly trying to gauge your whoever you're photographing or whoever you're talking to. But I think the first thing is just to really listen and really pay attention to. Sometimes I'm paying more attention to the subject and the way they're interacting with me than the photos themselves. Like, this could be a very badly lit photo. I don't care right now. I care about who's sitting in front of me. But thankfully, I can do both. So.
Yeah. Can everyone still hear me? Okay, yeah, because my internet again. But I think I caught what you said, I caught most of what you said, Faiza. And I just want to say that's very interesting about just ensuring people listen. And is that is that been the pattern that's come up for you? It's ensure when you create a space of wanting to listen to people who come from a lot of vulnerable spaces, you feel that they feel that level of trust with you. Is that your advice for everyone today, is making sure that you create that space to listen and be present when people are when they're going into vulnerable spaces?
I think as long as you're respectful when you're going into these spaces, it shouldn't, like, if you come with that intention, it should be fine, I guess. Is there a second part to the question? I kind of missed part of it.
Yeah, no, I was just curious what your, because I know listen it's accessible for people, right? But are they listening intentionally? Are they listening consciously?
Okay.
Like, I feel like, what is what can we tell folks to, in your experience, right? Because you've come across a lot of people that have gone through a lot of experiences that does require maybe sometimes even more than listening. Like, you have to show up as someone that's an ally, that's really willing to go through this traumatic memory with them again. So yeah, I'm just curious if you had any more insights that you were going to add to
on top of listening. Yeah, definitely, if you have the power to do something, that means a lot as an ally. Also, just validating whoever you're talking to, validating feelings is a really big thing. As counselors, we're taught to kind of summarize what we heard and then say it back every couple of minutes. Say, oh, just so I understand, you said A, B, and C, and you feel like this. Is that correct? And then they go, yes. And then that kind of proves to whoever you're talking to that you do care, you are listening, instead of, like I said, that's part of it. I can't give you the whole 2-year master's in this call. Right?
Good point. Good point. Thank you so much, because I can see how your academic background also and your how they kind of combine with your art. So thank you for that. Her same question. I'm curious, how do you build safe spaces with your art? If you're trying to sort of express more publicly, how do you ensure that you're also inclusive with your art? I'm curious how you express.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll answer this question, and maybe I'll show some of my work, because I think it helps in terms of sort of like I guess drawing a connection between what I'm talking about and sort of what I create. But I very much think that sort of creating space, working with people, forming community is there's a lot that goes into it. And I think that we oftentimes we say words, we bring people to the table, or make sure your space is inclusive, but I think we don't even interrogate what those words mean and what the actions are behind it. And I always, when I'm curating an event, when I'm curating a space, when I'm creating markets, and even the collective that I started with, members of my community came from an understanding of the fact that the spaces we were in previously were A, not built for us, but B, were not interested in making us feel as though we were valuable beyond being tokenized, or they were not interested in what we had to say. They were very interested in a very one-dimensional view of a Black queer person, or just a Black person, or whatever box they felt they needed to check in that moment. And so when I'm creating space, I think the first thing I always ask is if I'm even the best person to be doing it. And I think that like is so necessary when we are thinking about working in community, because I think like we're human, and I think like the like world we live in rewards like ego, and it rewards a lack of humility, and it encourages us to assume that we should be the one that does everything, but also that there's like all of these incentives to be the one that does everything. There's like money, there's fame, there's more opportunities, right? And so like I think even stepping back and be like, okay, am I well placed to do this? Like, am I the best person? Do I have the most experience? Do I have the most connections with the people that I'm like trying to serve or trying to work with? And then beyond that, also, do I have the like emotional, mental capacity right now? Like, am I going to churn out like an event that is like not great because I don't have the emotional bandwidth, or I can't really respond to people. I can't give people what they need in that moment. And so I think it's like starts with like questioning your place. And then once you're like, okay, maybe I am the best person, then it's like, do I need to do this alone? Am I doing this again? Like, what is my purpose? Like, am I doing this so that like I can showcase my work, which is totally fine. Or like, am I doing this for community? And if I'm doing this for people around me, then who needs to be involved at the very beginning? Like when I look around at the people I'm planning with, does everyone look the same? Does everyone have the same experiences? And that's not even just like the way we look. Like I think race is a huge part of it. I think gender is a huge part of it. I think sexuality is a huge part of it. I think ability is also a huge part of it. Is there only able-bodied people around this table? But I also think like it's also like beyond the things we see. It's like lived experiences. Are we only organizing with people from the same socioeconomic like bracket that we're in? Do we only speak to people or organize with people that like went to university? Like I think all of those things are so important when we talk about like serving community, because I think it's like really important that we also don't take like a top-down approach. I think studying like global politics and like development, I think I'm very like critical of like paternalistic action for community. And I think that it has to be co-created. It has to be like people working together to create solutions that work for them. And so, yeah, all of that to say that I think there's, even in the thinking stage of creating space, there's so much intention and work that has to go into it if you want it to be something that's sustainable, if you want it to be a space that feels good. Because when you're doing that at the beginning, then all of the actions you take moving forward are also, I think, going to come with that same intentionality and meaning. It means you're going to consider like whether the space you're hosting the event in is accessible for everyone. It means you're going to consider whether or not like the fact that like it's in like I don't know, like a neighborhood that is like traditionally more racist to people means that some people just won't come. Like there's so much to think about, and it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect. Like I think one thing that I have learned, I started doing like event programming like 6 years ago now, and the first event that I ever hosted is like, it's so much learning that you do every time. You reflect on what you could have done better. You reflect on like best practices that have developed in your communities, and like the ways that you're like, oh my gosh, now I know more about image descriptions than I did before. And now therefore I'm able to like access more communities. I know to ask if people need like sign language interpretations. Like, yes, exactly. What Kate said, we're always learning. And I think the most important thing is to like never cap our learning, never assume we know everything, never assume that we like have checked all the boxes of who needs to be included, like always reach further. And I think that's even a thing that I've been doing with the people that I like naturally organize with, because I think I organize with people that are like Black and queer, and I think we're like, well, we are like from traditionally marginalized communities, but also being like, okay, but even at our tables, even within our communities, who is not being included in this conversation? Like who are we still leaving out? And like constantly pushing and never assuming that we've done enough, I think is so key. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, thank you so much, Hoa. I really liked what you said about just that, first of all of us having this self-awareness with, are we the right people to be here? Are we like, is this the space that I can most I can most contribute to? And if it's supposed to be somebody else, partnering and really creating that collaboration. And yeah, and I think that's one thing that is very undervalued, is really reaching out to communities, actively seeking out communities that support a lot of marginalized folks to learn from and to offer resources and to co-create and to collaborate. I think a lot of times people assume that these are the needs that exist and these are the ones that we want to put out there into the community. But yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think that a lot of the advice you shared is really, really valuable. I know we are running, as with these types of conversation, we always run out of time. That's it. Time where an endless commodity for everybody. But I do have one question that I was hoping I would ask to both of you, because again, in the work that you do, in the spaces that you create, and in the identities that you wish to highlight and spotlight through the work that you do, a lot of the time we don't ask what the legacy is that you want to leave behind. You know, what is that legacy you want for yourselves and the people that you're creating for? What is that legacy you want people to know when you when you've sort of parked your sort of, you've dropped the brushes down and you've sort of bid farewell to everything? What is that legacy you want to leave behind?
That's a big question. But what I would say is the primary thing that I try to do with my photography is to humanize the subjects. When I think of a legacy, I don't think of myself only as a photographer, but for also all the people that share their stories and their faces as well. So I want, these quotes, these interviews, as well as the images to kind of live on. I'm just a tool in sharing their voices. So that's kind of my answer.
Thank you so much, Faiza. That's actually quite beautiful, being a vessel for these stories. I think that's pretty profound. Hara, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, maybe this is, I also am aware that maybe everyone always feels like they're living through an important moment in history. But I think that's okay. I really want people who see my work or who work with me, like, to feel like their stories and their lives and their experiences matter, like have huge impact. And not in like a have huge impact, like everyone needs to be famous and like, or something, but like you as a person, as a creator, like the dreams, the beliefs, the thoughts, the ideas, what you put out into the world, like it matters, and it's going to matter like now as you live and exist and breathe and impact people around you, but it's also going to matter like beyond you. And like, I think that's why I'm so passionate about like writing and archiving and like creating zines and collaborative works, because I want people to know that like we, like as we exist right now, we're so impacted by what has been created like before us. When we think about like things like bowls, that were created, and then like we dig them up and they tell us about like history and life and like how people lived, like everything we do and we create is going to have an impact. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big, maybe the thing you create will inspire a revolution, maybe it'll like change the way people think and feel and breathe. And so just like navigate the world with care and with the understanding that you have impact on other people. And yeah, I hope that's what people take. I just want people to be like creative and dream and like be really happy. That's like really sappy, but I'm just like, I just want everyone to vibe and like live beautiful lives.
That's the tagline. Just vibe, everybody. Just vibe. Yeah. So I'm thinking, Hara, do you have your work that anything you want to share with us before we go?
Yeah, I can share a couple of stuff as we leave the space. I will share some work. One second. I'm going to share my most recent project because it was a commission for the Enchanté Network. And I really love it because I think it also speaks a lot to like where I am at in terms of my artistic practice right now. And yeah, I just really love this piece. It is about like Black queer identity and existence on so-called Canada. And so I like draw on like the traditional communities of like Africville in Nova Scotia and Eglinton West in Toronto and Montreal North, and also like take on like the textiles from like Somalia and Ethiopia and Nigeria, and I'm just like really trying to create a tapestry of Blackness, because I think oftentimes when people think of like being Black and queer, they're like I want to really show that like Black queer people exist everywhere, and our existence is like life and vibrance, joy, and community. And so yes, I'm really excited about this piece, and also because I feel like it really speaks to like how much I love texture in my work. Just I want people to be able to reach in and touch it, you know.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is quite beautiful, and I know that there have been links that have been shared throughout the event, so I'm sure people can follow and continue to see that journey that you both have, you and Faiza. So I know we have now reached the time limit of this event. We did want to have time for audience Q&A, but it's sadly there's no time, which again I wish we did, but this is also good news because it means that this conversation will continue to happen beyond just this 1 hour slot. So if you have questions that you wanted to ask Harar and Faiza, please email the GenNext team. And I don't know if there's an email that we put there in the chat, but please email them or connect with them, and they will get those questions to both Faiza and Harar, and hopefully get you some responses, and you can keep that conversation going. I think dialogue like this should continue. I don't think it should be ever limited to, you know, a time slot. So if we can continue this conversation offline, that's probably ideal. So thank you both. It's been such a, yeah, it's been great. I got to learn a little bit more about your work. And I think that there's so much more that we'll you know we'll see and hear from the both of you as you grow your expression. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure to get to connect with everybody in the audience as well. Before we wrap things up, I think there's a surprise for someone in the audience, and I'll pass the metaphorical mic back to Tristan, as Tristan will guide us through the event wrap-up section.
Yeah, thanks, Zainab. Yeah, so really quickly, in honor of today being GenNext East Ontario's first birthday, we're going to do a special giveaway to kick off an entire month long of celebration. So on this day last year, GenNext expanded across Ottawa, Prescott, Russell, Lanark, and Renfrew counties, and GenNext EO was born. So we've randomly drawn one name from the list of participants today, and the winner is Delaney Leaf. So congratulations, Delaney. So you've actually won one of Harar's tote bags. So very lucky today. One of our moderators is sending you a direct message right now to confirm your email. And then someone from our team will be in touch about getting this tote bag to you after the event. So if you weren't Delaney, not to worry. We're planning lots of more special giveaways on our Instagram in the next month for our first birthday. So be sure to follow at GenNext East ON to find out the details. And if you don't already, you'll want to subscribe to that newsletter I mentioned earlier, because there's a special gift to subscribers in the works as well. So all those links will be put in the chat. So finally, to wrap it up, our communities really rely on your support. So if you can make a donation to GenNext, just know that it's so appreciated. And any support we receive helps break down barriers, improve lives, and create opportunities for the people who need us the most in our local region. So that's all from me and the GenNext team. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we really hope you all enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. A huge thank you to Faiza and Harar for sharing their journeys and for taking the time to answer our questions. And thank you so much, Zainab, for being such an amazing host and bringing your own knowledge and experience, to this conversation. And again, one last shout out to our supporting sponsors, Top Shelf Distillers, and Dominion City Brewing Company. Obviously, none of this would be possible without them. Thank you so much, everyone.